Hello,
Here,
Senator. How are you?
Jessica, I'm great. I'm so glad to be with you tonight.
Good to see you again. I'm just curious, do you prefer to be addressed by Senator or do you like your trail name better?
You can call me Tim or Dog Bull, my trail name, and I will describe the origins of it and even show you a visual aid during the talk tonight.
Wonderful. I can't wait. Now, Senator, I understand that you were going to read a passage from your book. Is that right?
Yeah, first, and Jessica, thank you. I know you are traveling in the great outdoors all over the place, and you're in a different time zone than I am, but I'm glad that we're together. And I want to thank the ATC for all their help. The Sandy and the ATC crew helped me do my trip, and we continue to work together. But yeah, I thought to start the book talk, I might read a little section from Walk, Ride, Paddle right here. And this is a section where I've started to hike south from Harper's Ferry to Tennessee. I'm 5 or 6 days in. The hike was the first of the three journeys, hike and then the walk and then the ride and the paddle. But I'm trying to figure out if I can actually do this. And I hit upon a mantra on the hike that is hike when I want, rest when I want, and camp when I want. So I'm going to read this, and this is about day 6 of the book. As I continue to hike during this hot July stretch, each of my 3 rules are taking shape. I mentioned earlier that my trail mantra was walk when I want, rest when I want, camp when I want. Since I don't have a fixed date by which I have to finish the Virginia AT, why stress out about how many miles I have to do each day? Walk when I want is how I start the day. Usually I'm up with the sunrise, although a bit creaky after spending a night on the ground. Even a nice sleeping pad leaves you stiff when you wake up. I'll putter around for about an hour, taking my time with eating breakfast and packing my gear. After an hour or so, I'm stretched out and ready to start walking. If I'm near a shelter, an hour of motion gives my digestive system time and inclination to use the privy so much easier than breaking out the trowel along the trail. Rest when I run is easy. I always want to rest, especially when I'm climbing a hill. I stop whenever I feel like it, but usually for only about 2 minutes at a time. And I figured out that the ideal stopping spot, a log or rock on the side of the trail that is about thigh high, is the perfect place to sit without having to take off my pack. And this becomes a little motivator for me. If I'm climbing and want to stop, I wait to look around the next bend to see what's up ahead. If I don't see the right kind of rock or log, I go to the next bend and then the next until I find the perfect spot. It's amazing what a 2 or 3 minute rest will do with a sip of water to reclaim your energy. The longer rests are when I take off my pack. I usually do a mid morning stop of about 20 minutes, an hour long lunch stop, and a mid afternoon stop. When the pack is off, I stretch out, check my phone for messages, take a picture or two, and think about my progress. For the third rule, camp when I want, I always start the day with a basic idea of where I'll spend the night. But that basic idea can easily change. Weather, fatigue, my pace, the pace of folks hiking with me, trying to coordinate a meeting spot with someone joining me, the quality of the campsites I pass during the day, all these factors could make me stop sooner or go farther. And to be clear, camp when I want is a bit of a misnomer. I sleep in my bivy sack most nights, but other nights I'll be in cabins, ATC shelters, motels, or hiker hostels when the AT intersects a town. And even the camping has variety. Sometimes I'll be in the wild, sometimes in a state or federal park along the way, sometimes in or near an AT shelter where I know I'll find water. The variety of where I sleep each night is part of the diverse experience of a long hike.
Thank you so much for that, Senator. I know a lot of long distance hikers have mantras to help them get through challenging times. And I'm just curious, how did that mantra transfer to other aspects of your personal and professional life?
Jessica, this mantra was one that I came up with on like the third day of the hike, the first segment of my nature triathlon. Because look, I'm a U.S. senator. I'm scheduled every minute of my life, and I'm type A. So when I plan this out, it's like on day one I'll go from A to B, and day two B to C, and C to D. And I realized a couple of days in, what am I trying to do? I'm not trying to set a speed record here. I'm trying to enjoy nature. So it took me about 3 days in to realize that it's okay to have a plan, but maybe it was John Lennon, life's what happens when your plans fall through. If you have a plan, but then before you get to your designated camping spot, you see the perfect place to camp, why wouldn't you stop early and camp there? So I would say that the this walk when I want, rest when I want, camp when I want, kind of convinced me that yeah, it's okay to set a plan, but it's also more than okay to break the plan when the spirit moves. And that has extended both personal and even in my job in terms of priorities that I might think are important, but then I'll decide, okay, let's do something different.
Right. Let's take a step back for a moment. So, this adventure that you went on was over 1,200 miles in Virginia, hiking and cycling and also canoeing down the James River. This is a huge undertaking. What was the inspiration for your adventure?
Jessica, thanks for asking that. I'm I don't know if you're like me, maybe some of the folks on this virtual book talk are like me. I like to mark milestones. And I turned 60 in 2018 when I was running for reelection to the Senate. And I wanted to mark 60, but I couldn't do it in an election year. I was too busy. So I said, okay, next year I'll do it. And next year, 2019, was actually my 25th year in public life for my first city council election. So okay, what can I do to mark turning 60 in 25 years? And I just decided the thing to do was to create an epic Virginia quest. And this resonates with you because of what you do. There are states. The one that I'm most familiar with is New York, where there's a thing called the 46ers. There's 46 peaks in the Adirondacks higher than 4,000 feet. And New Yorkers will embrace over the course of their life, can I climb all of them? My sister and brother-in-law live in Casanova, New York, and they've done it with their kids and dogs. And it took them about 10 years. My wife, Ann, and I joined them on a few. I decided, okay, Virginia needs an epic quest. And what would it be? And as soon as I asked myself that question, the answer sprung into my mind immediately. Hike the whole Virginia section of the Appalachian Trail, Harper's Ferry to Tennessee, bicycle the entire Virginia section of the Blue Ridge Parkway and Skyline Drive from North Carolina to Front Royal, and then canoe the entire James River from Iron Gate to Fort Monroe in the Chesapeake Bay. So the answer came immediately, but it was a lot easier to think of the idea than actually do it. But once I decided that's going to be the quest, I just decided, let me do this to mark turning 60 and celebrating 25 years. And I kind of call it a love letter to Virginia. Just like you, Jessica. I'm my wife and I and our kids. We are really intense outdoors people, but setting a quest and then trying to do it and then sharing it with others, maybe in the hopes that they'll do it too. That's what motivated this.
Now, Virginia has the longest stretch of AT, doesn't it? With over 550 miles of the trail alone in Virginia. So, why did you decide to start your journey by hiking the AT?
Well, Jessica, I decided that I would, and I made a mistake in this sort of. I decided as I'm aging, let me do the hardest one first and then move to the easiest. So I decided that the trail would be the hardest, and it was. It was 42 days in 2019. most of it in a record-breaking summer of heat with so many days over 90 degrees and water sources dried up. So I wisely decided to do the hardest one first. And then the bike trip, 320 miles from Virginia, North Carolina to Front Royal, I did that one in 2020, and that was the easiest one. But I thought the river trip would be even easier because I'm in a boat. I mean, the current is pushing you. I was wrong about that. The 350 miles from Iron Gate to Fort Monroe was very challenging. It was scary because I'm down in the tidal section, with ocean going barges and subs and carriers and wind and tide. Balcony Falls is intense. The Richmond Rapids are intense. I switched to a raft through Richmond. So I would say that I decided on the hike first because I thought it was going to be hardest, but I thought the river trip would be kind of a cruise. It ain't no cruise. Everything from the logistics of planning it to the putting in, I don't know how many private properties I had to trespass on to get my boat in the water along some stretches of the James, but I did it, and it was amazing. But yeah, the hike I did first because it was the hardest.
So, 2/3 of that hike you did alone. What did you learn in that time about yourself?
Yeah, the hike was mostly a solitude experience. The bike trip was a reprise of a bike trip that I had done with the same group of law school buddies 25 years ago. There's a cool event called RAGBRAI, the Register Annual Great Bike Ride Across Iowa, and the group had done that 25 years ago. But the Blue Ridge and Skyline are a lot steeper than Iowa is. And then the river trip, I always had somebody in the front of the boat to talk to me about the river, the James River Association, Virginia tribal leaders, and others. But you're right, the hike was solitude. It was very hard. I mean, as hard as the hike was physically, the mental challenge of being by myself was really, really tough. Even camping by myself, I remember the first night camping in my little bivy sack in a massive rainstorm and waking up, finding myself talking to one of my kids or my wife because they've been camping with me, and then realizing no one's in this bivy with me. No one's within 10 miles of me. No one knows what I'm thinking or can hear me if I cry for help. So it was a real challenge. In some ways, as hard as the physical part of the hike was, the mental part was even harder. There was a stretch of 4 days on the Appalachian Trail, kind of between the James River and Roanoke, where not only was I hiking by myself in August, record-breaking heat, water sources dried up, I was not only hiking by myself, but I didn't see anybody. And you'd round a corner and there would be a deer there, and it was like company, someone I can talk to. So it was tough, but that also was just part of the journey. I mean, part of the journey.
Now, from the beginning of the book, you mentioned having doubts about being able to complete this challenge, and you talked about having a lot of fear as well. And some of it was fear about getting injured, fear of something going wrong, fear of what other people would think of you. So what kept you motivated, and what advice would you offer anyone who also might have some fear or be unsure about taking on an outdoor challenge?
Jessica, I'm glad you asked that. You do such a good job of trying to make Virginia outdoors accessible to all, but there are a lot of fears. I mean, the year that I hiked the trail, sadly, there was a tragedy when I was hiking the trail. A mentally disturbed guy, killed a veteran hiking through Virginia, a through hiker down in like Bland County, and badly wounded another hiker who had then had to like stumble 6 miles to a road crossing to get help. And so, whether it was people, ticks, spiders, falling trees, widowmakers, bears, snakes, lightning, your own doubts about your capacities. I mean, I just confronted it every day. And I think it was on the 560 miles from Harper's Ferry to Tennessee. It wasn't until I got past mile 300 that I stopped thinking every day about quitting. I mean, it took me 300 miles before I stopped thinking about quitting. I mean, the voice in your head that says, why do I have to do this? I mean, I have a busy job. Isn't a day hike pleasant? I mean, why be so type A about all this? So my advice to anyone, if you read my book, you're going to see these segments. It's 76 chapters for 76 days to do the 3 journeys. If you see something you like, just do that little segment on the trail, on your bike, or in a canoe. Just do that segment. I give you enough in the book, but also in the acknowledgement sections at the end. I kind of list, trail guides from the ATC, from the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club, from the James River Association. I give little, resources about how to do it. So just do one segment. That would be the first thing. And then the second thing is, if you're a real neophyte, you don't have to do it on your own. There's great hiking clubs that will do it. There's great river outfitters. Somebody told me that I want to do the Virginia Nature Triathlon, but I've never been in a canoe. And I said, well, the upper 70 or 80 miles of the James, there's a great outfitter in Buchanan called Twin Rivers Outfitter, and they'll rent you the boat, and they have a campsite on the river, and they'll help you do it. So do it 1 or 2 days at a time, and then rely on people who've done it before, and that will help you build confidence.
Every now and then I challenge myself by doing something that scares me half to death. And when I come out of it, I feel like, okay, I just did that. I can take on anything. Do you ever find yourself thinking back on the Virginia Nature Triathlon and your experience outside and thinking, if I did that, I can do this too?
Yeah, so there were a number of points along the way, from bear interactions to, super long days where I had to get places. But probably the most significant example of that was the last day of the 76 days. I had come down the James River from Iron Gate to the James River Bridge, which crosses the James River in Newport News. And when it was built in the 1920s, it was the longest bridge in the world. I had pulled aside there at a marina. My last day was to paddle my canoe down the James River through the Monitor Merrimack Bridge Tunnel where it drops under the water. I was going to go through the cut and then take a left turn and paddle another 7 miles through the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel to Fort Monroe in the Chesapeake Bay. Okay, a 12-mile paddle. What could go wrong? I get up on the last day and it's a small craft warning, and I'm definitely a small craft. And I decide a game time call. I had some friends who were going to tail me in a fishing boat to make sure that I didn't hurt myself. And they had brought a sea kayak, and I switched the canoe for a sea kayak on the last day. But my oldest son and I, we paddled out of a marina into this small craft advisory. And just the sound of the wind and the waves were so intense. I just thought for the first, 400 or 500 yards, we have to turn back. We're going to drown. But my son, who was a Marine infantry commander and who's a very good whitewater boater, he was sitting in the front and I'm in the back. And he just was paddling like there was no problem. And I just thought, this is really frightening. I am completely out of my comfort zone. Some friends caught a picture of me with us in the kayak and aircraft carriers, ocean-going vessels around us. But you know what? We looked ahead, and I'm like, I've come 338 miles. I have 12 miles to go. I'm not stopping. And we did it.
What a story. That's amazing. So tell us now about your trail name and how you got your trail name.
Well, I will do this, Jessica, on 2 conditions. If you will respond and tell me your trail name, and then if people in the chat might put up their trail names, because hearing trail names is great. So, the trail name phenomenon, as you know, is it's a great small d democratizer. You're wearing hiking clothes, you haven't showered, and you have a trail name, and that's an equalizer with everybody. But the trail name is not really one you pick. It's one others bestow upon you. So In the early part of the AT hike, I just call myself TK. But this is a hack. This is a hack that I use. This is a collapsible dog bowl that I would carry with me on the trail. And when I would get to the shelter at the end of the day, or wherever I was camping, I'd fill this up with water and Dr. Bronner's soap, and I would wash my face and then my socks in that order. That's the most important thing I'm going to say tonight. You don't wash your socks first and then your face. Wash your face and then your socks. Anyway, I was doing this one day, and somebody who was there at the campground with me thought it was cool. And I said, yeah, let's a dog bowl. Well, the next day, the same person hiking southbound like I was, thought I was maybe too impressed with it and called me Dog Bowl. And so my trail name is Dog Bowl, which I relish because when I did the hike in 2019, my wife Ann and I, our longtime family dog Gina, had died maybe 2 years before, but her dog bowl was still sitting on the floor next to our kitchen table because the quirky trait of our SPCA adopted mutt was she would not eat unless we ate. So she could have a full dog bowl and would not touch food until the family sat down at the dinner table. So we kept her dog bowl next to our table. Now, I want to make clear, this is not Gina's dog bowl. I got my own dog bowl. But anyway, Dog Bowl is my trail name.
Excellent. It looks like Pete from Roanoke says that his trail name is Stumpy.
I'm sure there's a story there.
Oh, yeah. There's always a story, right? I'm not seeing any other responses just yet, though. Hold on. Let me see. Nope, not yet. That was the only response that we got.
Okay, but how about you, Jessica?
So my trail name is Daughter of Adventure, which came from a conversation I was having with a friend about, you probably know there's a part of Virginia named Daughter of the Stars, which is where Shenandoah River State Park is located. Yep. And we were having a conversation about how interesting that name was. And he said, you should be called Daughter of Adventure. So that's stuck.
That's a great name for you.
Yeah. Okay. So one theme that was carried throughout your book was the importance of getting more people outside. You say that users of natural resources become stewards of natural resources. How important is the outdoor community in preserving our public lands and natural resources?
Very important. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really worried about this. I think if you're not inculcated into being an outdoors person yourself, then you're less likely to be a steward. And we see a real need to create stewards. And then if you are passionate about being outdoors, you don't have to make a decision to be a steward. You just become a steward. And so I think that is a really, really important thing. And that's one of the reasons that I wrote this up. My fantasy is that the Virginia Nature Triathlon could become what the 46ers are in New York, something that people might just decide over the course of your life, you might do this. And if you do it, or even if you do a segment here or a segment there, then you'll want to protect and preserve. But I think the whole key to creating the stewards that we need is getting people outdoors. And I will say that after I finished this journey in October of 2021, I just decided, well, what can I do more as a senator, on public lands bills? I've got a couple of really great wilderness area bills, one Shenandoah Mountain, and then another one in Allegheny and Bath counties, where you're trying to create wilderness areas. But we do this to try to not only preserve nature, but to reward the stewards who are coming together around, tables in church basements to plot out the ways that they can be environmental champions. And the more we get people out, the more stewards we're going to have.
Absolutely. Yes. And as you know, I'm a former fourth grade teacher, and I couldn't agree more. If we don't start talking to children and getting them outside very early on, then it's unlikely they're going to make a connection, so that when they're an adult, they're going to value that connection. Looks like we have a couple more responses
So,
coming through
Jessica,
now. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, I just was going to say the same thing that you did. I've seen now people are putting responses up in the Q&A, not the chat. So I see monkey, I see
Yeah.
slapshot.
Yep.
I'm seeing some good trail names.
I was just going to share those with you. I'm glad you can see them. Okay, so why do you feel it's important to tell the history of our land and trails? Because your book is just full of stories about the history of Virginia. So why was that important to you?
Well, Jessica, you're a fourth grade teacher, so I mean, you get this. I was struck everywhere I've been in the most obscure area. Humans have been there, and sometimes you see places like, wow, how did people think that they could make a living here? I mean, I'll just tell you, a couple that were so powerful. Brown Mountain Creek. I tell that story. It's a stretch of the AT immediately south of Route 60 in Amherst County. And this is a community where a lot of enslaved people and others lived. And after the Civil War, the newly freed folks who had been enslaved decided to stay there. And it's an incredibly narrow hollow. When you hike through it, you see the ruins of these stone cabins, and they're very beautiful. It's kind of eerie, almost kind of mystical. But the history is a sad one, which is these families lived there in this narrow hollow and they eked out a living doing a little bit of farming and maybe some hunting. But then Lynchburg decided to buy that little hollow and dam up the creek to create the reservoir on this upstream creek of the Peddler River to serve the city's water system. And these families had to move out. And when you walk by the ruins of their stone cabins and you see them there, or when you walk by in the Shenandoah National Park and you see little graveyards that were, quote, abandoned when they kicked everybody out of the Blue Ridge to create the Shenandoah National Park, but they're not really abandoned because the graveyards are still lovingly tended. You realize, wow, you might, if you're doing this, you have this sense of thankfulness for those who created the parks or created the Appalachian Trail, but you have to think one level deeper. These were created often at the cost of people who had been there, and that's all they'd ever known, and they were moved out. So, every place in Virginia, there's history. I don't know if you've ever hiked in this area down near Blacksburg called Bruiser Cairns. It's this ridge that's super obscure up in kind of maybe Montgomery or Pulaski County. And there's these big stacks of stones. And some people thought they might be gravestones. They're 10 or 15 feet high, but probably more likely they were farmers who were trying to farm this incredibly unforgiving landscape, and they would dig up rocks and then pile them up. And you walk by these stone sentinels that just are there as a tribute to whoever was there before that tried to make a go of it. There's no place along this trail, the segregation history of the Shenandoah National Park. Senator Harry Byrd tried to convince FDR to create the Shenandoah, but the deal was we'll assemble the land as Virginians, we'll buy it, we'll give it to the National Park Service, but you have to keep it segregated. That's the condition of the gift. Every little place, as wild and as seemingly untouched by human hands as it is, there is a human history there. And maybe 1/4 of the history in this book was history I knew, and 3/4 was history I learned as I was on the way.
So fascinating. I love those stories. That's such a lovely element to your book that I really appreciated. Maybe that's the fourth grade teacher in me, but I enjoyed it. I see that there are some questions coming in from the audience. Are you up for answering some questions from folks?
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll see how many we can get through before our time is up today, and I'll be keeping an eye on the clock. But the first question we have here says, you came up with the idea of the Virginia Nature Triathlon. Have you heard of any others who have done it after you?
Jessica, I don't think anyone has ever done it until I did, because as soon as I finished in October of 2021, I wrote a piece in Blue Ridge Outdoors, and I said, okay, I've done this, and I think I'm the first, but tell me if I'm wrong. And I felt like the Blue Ridge Outdoors readership would be a pretty good readership. And no one has come to me and said, we've done this. So that has convinced me not only I am the first, but I'm the fastest so far. I mean, as soon as the second person does it, I will not be the fastest. I don't know of anyone else who has done it, but I met someone at Trail Days in Damascus Saturday who knows you and knows me, who did the trail after hearing about my nature triathlon, decided I'll do it too. And the AT took me 42 days, and he did it in 28. But when I asked him, okay, well, what about the bike portion, or what about the canoe portion? He goes, well, I'm not a canoeer, so I'm going to have to learn. And he expressed some reticence about the biking because it's on roads with cars. Yes. And obviously it's easier to bike on roads with no cars. But I will say Blue Ridge Parkway and Skyline Drive, limited speed. Nobody's on those roads to go fast. Everybody's looking at views, and most of the drivers are used to cyclists. So, I think although dealing with cars can be a hassle, I think the Blue Ridge Parkway and Skyline Drive is about as good a road as you can be on to do some cycling.
Yeah, I will say I know of at least a few people who are attempting the Virginia Nature Triathlon. As we said before, you've been a guest on Virginia Outdoor Adventures podcast twice now, and you've inspired some folks. One of them is the person that you met at Trail Days, and there's a few others too. So pretty soon you're not going to be the only one. Yeah. As those people finish up. We should start a wall of fame or something for the people who complete it.
Well, and maybe I can let Jessica, I can let you be the air traffic controller. I would say the river trip is the hardest logistically, the put-ins, the takeouts, shuttling the vehicles. So once you've done the first two, if you are embarking on the river trip and you're a little bit flummoxed on how to do it, my book tells you point to point, and the acknowledgments gives you some, resources you can use. But if you're still flummoxed, call Jessica, and Jessica will connect you with me, and I'll give you some tips.
Yes, or they could go to your website, walkrightpaddle.com, where there is a link now to Far Out, which has just launched a guide called the Virginia Nature Triathlon that actually follows your route. So that's another fantastic resource.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that. If I have inspired a Far Out trail app, I don't need to do anything else in life.
That makes you a celebrity for eternity. Okay, next question. Do you have any plans to hike the entire Appalachian Trail?
Interesting. No, I don't, Jessica. I've never wanted to do the whole AT, but I decided after I did the Nature Triathlon, the hike was in 2019, bike in 2020, James River 2021. It's like, you know what? I'm going to do an adventure every year. So in 2022, I did my oldest son and I bike packed from Pittsburgh to DC on the Allegheny Passage and the C&O Towpath. So 5-day, 330-mile bike packing trip. In 2023, one of my best buddies had a bucket list trip to hike from Mont Blanc to the Matterhorn in the Alps. It's kind of a classic Alps hike, and we did that for 8 days. And I have a bunch. I want to do the Boundary Waters in Minnesota. I want to do the Camino de Santiago. I want to do the Katy Trail in Missouri from Kansas City to St. Louis. I grew up in Kansas City. So I'm not going to do the whole AT, but I've got a whole bunch of trips that I'm like, if I could do the Virginia Nature Triathlon, I think I could adventure for quite a while.
That's right. So someone who's looks like their trail name is Trail Boss is asking if you have any plans to remove obsolete dams that you had a portage around.
Well, that's a really good one. So the hardest portion of the James River to do, there's some intense whitewater balcony falls in Richmond, but the hardest portion is 7 dams above Lynchburg, and obsolete dams. 2 might have a current use, maybe one for creating some power and one to divert water into a water treatment system, but most of them are obsolete. When I was mayor of Richmond, we either removed or breached all the dams in the Richmond metro area to allow migratory fish to go upstream. Bossier Dam was the last one, and we created a fish ladder for shad to come upstream. But there's a lot of these dams above Lynchburg. The good news is, in Lynchburg, I think the city has really kind of turned back toward the river and embraced it. And the first one that they want to reconfigure is the dam that's right above downtown. And I can't remember the name of it, but it's a dam that was built to channel water into their water treatment system. And they have figured out a plan, the James River Association, to channel some water into the water treatment system, but maybe on one side of the dam to reconfigure it into a whitewater feature that would both be good for migratory fish, but also for, fun water sports activity. So you've seen over the years, like the dams on the Rappahannock in Fredericksburg have been breached. The Richmond dams have been breached, or fish ladders have been created. So, let's do more.
Great. We've got a couple more questions. Somebody would like to know if you embarked on any type of a training program to prepare. This person said it's been a dream for them to do a through hike, but they're a relatively unfit 63-year-old retiree.
Well, I'm going to tell this person, I met a lot of people just like you doing through hikes. So I just did the Virginia portion, but I met a lot of retirees who their goal in retirement was to hike the AT. And some were hiking it in 1 year, and some, I met a guy named Boxcar Willie who was from Utah. And get this, Jessica, his whole career had been with the Utah Wildlife Department. I mean, he was like an animal biologist, and what a great job. But as beautiful as the mountains are in Utah, his goal in retirement was to hike the AT. And one night I'm camping at a shelter that is a little bit south of the Priest, this great climb that you do just south of the Tye River. I think it's called the Woodworth Sealy Shelter. I'm camping there one night by myself, and it's dark, and I hear this trudging steps coming up, and this guy comes up, and he's really beat. And he says, do you have any fuel? I'm out of fuel. I need to make dinner. So I helped him make dinner, and I heard about his story. And, he was a retiree, and he hadn't done a ton, but at age 70, he was doing the AT. So if you're a 63-year-old and you don't think you're in like super fantastic shape, I wouldn't say, embrace the through hike as your first thing. But I would say get this book or get some, Appalachian Trail Club, ATC resources I used heavily on this trail, and just go out and do 1 day first, and you'll be hooked. And then you'll do a weekend next. And then after the weekend, you'll do a week, and then you'll figure it out. The 42 days of hiking that I did a week or so trying to figure out what the right gear mix was. Can I eat raw food, or I need to bring a stove? And it's a little bit of a shakedown cruise to figure out the right boots, the right equipment, and everything. But just do some day hikes in Virginia, and I think you'll get hooked.
I think that's right. All of us who do a couple of hikes in Virginia get hooked for the most part. And that's great advice. Can you, so let's talk about gear for just a moment. Can you tell us about your experience with a bivvy? Because that's pretty hardcore that you didn't carry a tent. And would you recommend that to other multi-day hikers?
That's a controversial one. Most people would go the other way and would pick a tent. I picked this bivvy that's lighter than 1 pound. I have some pictures of it in the book. I just really wanted I wanted lightweight, and I wanted super flexibility. When I went on the river, you can see my gear on the river. I have an Old Town Camper canoe that's built to carry a lot of gear. So I didn't skimp. I mean, full tent, camp chairs, everything that would fit in my canoe. But on the hiking trip, I went with a bivvy. And that was almost kind of an insurance policy too. Like, if I can't make it to the shelter, or if I get to the shelter and I still have energy, let me go on to the next water source. I really liked the bivy for the flexibility. And probably over the course of the 42 days, I'd stay in the shelter about a third of the time, stay in the bivy about a third of the time. But then look, if I'm going through a town and there's a hiker hostile, I'm not immune to creature comfort. So, I will always accept the kindness of strangers. I mean, that was my motto. But the bivy really gives you some nice flexibility. The one thing that's not good about a bivy is you can't fit any gear inside. So, I had a poncho as well. So if you're in the bivy, hang your pack on a tree with a poncho wrapped around it to keep it dry.
The first time I saw a photo of your bivy, I was impressed. So I give you props for that. We're going to land this plane pretty soon, but before we do, could you tell us what you hope readers will take away from your book?
Jessica, there's a lot to it. I mean, if you read it, it's about the journey, it's about Virginia history, it's about aging, it's about marriage. My wife does a third of the river with me. It's about parenthood and memories of kids' trips. It's about friendship. There's a lot to it, but here would be one thing I hope people might take away from it, and it was really comforting to me. It's a politically polarizing time right now, and in the work that I do, but maybe anybody, if you're just watching TV, you think everything's so polarized. But one of the things that I really learned to love is being out unshaven. People didn't recognize me. I'm shooting the breeze. We have our trail names. You realize political polarization is a thing. You can't sugarcoat it or deny it. But there's so many areas of our life where we're not divided. And you just have to broaden your aperture and realize that, okay, that's a real thing, but if there's other areas of our life where we're not divided, that is a bit of it gives you some perspective. Virginians, and maybe Kansans and Californians, but Virginians, everybody has a trail, a river, a sunset view, a marsh, a meadow that they love, and they all want their kids and grandkids to be able to experience it too. And it was very comforting for me to see that, because it had a way of putting in perspective that the divisions that are real are not complete, and we're more unified than we might imagine. So I hope people might get both some excitement about the natural beauty of Virginia and what they can do, but also a belief that there's if not unity in nature. I mean, a lot of nature is kill and be killed. There's harmony. There's harmony in nature, and that harmony is something that we shouldn't take for granted, and we should be thankful for.
I'd like to take a moment to thank the participants who joined us today. Thank you for joining us for this ATC event. Senator, do you want to share with folks where they can find your book?
Absolutely, I'll do that and two other things. So walkridepaddle.com. If you go there, you can find information about the book, including book events. I did a really fun book signing at Trail Days in Damascus yesterday. That was a blast. So find that there. I want to thank Jessica. Jessica, as a podcaster who has embraced telling the story about Virginia outdoors, but also about Virginia outdoor towns. Many of our towns and communities in Virginia are connected to the outdoors, but in recent years, some have really embraced that outdoor connection and really made it a part, communicated it as part of their DNA. And Jessica does a great job of that. And then I showed you one visual aid, my dog ball. I'm going to show you one other thing that's kind of fun. When I was embarking on this trip, again, born in 1958, and I'm trying to celebrate 60th birthday, 25 years in public life. Someone gave me 3 sets of guides from the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club from 1959 that are the AT in Virginia at that point. And I called this old guide OG. And if you read my book, I will quote OG fairly often, like the advice. Now, the trail is changing, they're rerouting it, but some of the trail is the same. And it's interesting to read what OG says about the AT in 1959 and what I'm finding it when I'm hiking it in 2019. And some of it is exactly the same. Some of it's different. The trail's been rerouted. Some of it is our mores and thinking about it has changed. So since I had that visual aid prepped, I just jammed it into the answer to that question, Jessica.
That's really cool. What a special and thoughtful gift. Senator,
Yeah.
it's always a pleasure to speak to you. If anybody would like to hear more conversations that you and I have had before, they can find that at virginiaoutdooradventures.com. And also your website, Walk, Ride, Paddle, has links to the 2 podcast episodes that you and I did together. Any parting words or advice?
Just it's the beautiful time of the year. I was in Appalachia all weekend, did a little bit of hiking on the Creeper Trail, met people at trail days. 2 weeks ago, did a little bit of hiking at White Oak Canyon. How about you, Jessica? What was your most recent Virginia adventure?
Oh my gosh. I was in the cute town of Urbana, which is on the Rappahannock. It is a lovely little town. I went boating, fishing, crabbing, paddling. It was just lovely. And I can't wait to get back to Urbana at some point, but also to scope out some of the other remarkable adventure towns we have all across Virginia.
Well, that will be our closing words, that if you live in Virginia, you will have a bucket list that will never be completely crossed off of beautiful places to go.
That's exactly right. Senator, thank you so much and have a wonderful night. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks to the ATC for all you do.